much, Marina, and thanks everyone for making the time to join us today. We are going to be splitting today's presentation into three parts. I'm going to spend a bit of time sharing with you some of what Volunteer Canada has learned and is working on with respect to employer-supported volunteering, or ESV, as we call it sometimes. Then I'm going to have a chance to interview Paulette and Judy about their experience working together on programs. They have actually been partners working together on community change for some time now. And then we will open up to questions from everyone. So again, thank you for joining us. Volunteer Canada's corporate citizenship program has four components to it, and we've been doing this for about 13 years now. Actually, with the support of Home Depot Canada, about 13 years ago, the National Corporate Council on Volunteering was developed. At the moment, this is a collection of 16 thought-leading companies that really work to see how they can maximize benefit to the community and to their company and to their employees through the corporate volunteering experience. We also work on a fee-for-service basis with companies, both on consulting about their program development, but also on helping them with some of their group volunteering activities. You can see in the corner here, this is an activity we did with Amex Canada last year with the support of Sick Kids, where we actually brought a corporate volunteering opportunity to the call center at Amex, folks that can't leave their desks. And then, of course, we develop knowledge assets. We like to speak to groups about employer-supported volunteering, both on the corporate side and the community side. And so it's from this experience that we have opportunity to share with you today. So as you may know from the 2013 Canada Survey of Giving and Volunteering and Participating of Statistics Canada, 44% of Canadians said that they volunteered in the year previous, which is fantastic. What's interesting from our corporate citizenship end is that over a third of those people said that they were supported by their employer to do so, which is fantastic and a growing trend. We did not see that in previous years of that survey. Of course, for companies, there are a lot of reasons to be involved with corporate volunteering or employer-supported volunteering. Externally, it helps to, of course, and the primary reason being enhancing social impact, but it also helps when they let it be known that they're doing this kind of work with customer relations, brand reputation. Sometimes it opens them up to new business opportunities, especially where they learn about new markets, new segments of society, or social conditions they didn't know about previously. It helps them fulfill on their corporate citizenship agenda, and it even helps them build relationships with business partners, particularly where they invite other companies that they are working with to take part with them in a volunteering opportunity. Internally, this is really important for talent recruitment and engagement. I'm going to get into that in some more detail, talent being their employees. Leadership skills and development are often, as we all know, a great outcome of volunteering. For a lot of people also who volunteer, there becomes new ways of working on process, coming up with interesting innovations, and sometimes there's even market growth insights. Here's a need in society, how can we address this? But also building relationships between departments is one of the things we definitely hear is an asset in what is often a team building activity. So most companies have a combination of these benefits in their value proposition, meaning when they are justifying why should we be going out and doing this, can our department, it's usually the corporate responsibility or public affairs department of a company looking for the resources to continue or expand, improve upon their employer-supported volunteering program. But the key driver, in our experience, for companies being involved in these programs and expanding them is employee expectation. So a few statistics for you. This slide here shows a statistic from the 2017 Edelman Trust Barometer. So this is an annual trust barometer that's run globally. You can, if you look it up online, you can find year over year the findings in, I think it is about 30 different countries that are polled. So what we know from the Canadian section of the poll this year is that 77% of Canadians agree that a company can take specific actions that both increase profits and improve the economic and social conditions in which the community operates. What's also interesting that you'll find about this poll is that Canadians' confidence in companies to do this is slightly behind, only slightly behind NGOs, and much less confidence in the government to take care of this. So really, Canadians are seeing businesses as being a major player in making social and environmental change. We also know from, now this is a US resource, that 71% of employees expect their employer to be able to provide opportunities to make a positive impact on the company's social and environmental commitments. And there's a further statistic where they look specifically on the fact that 77% of employees also hope that their employer will give them hands-on activities around environmental responsibility. There was not a specific question on social change. But these kinds of expectations are even higher with millennials. The same poll tells us that 64% of millennials consider a company's social and environmental commitments when deciding where to work. The same amount, 64%, won't take a job if a company doesn't have a strong corporate social responsibility values. 83% would be more loyal, they say, to a company that helps them contribute to social and environmental issues. So you can see that this is really, really significant for attracting and retaining employees. But a new statistic I'm really happy to share with the Charity Village audience is something that we're going to be releasing next week. 68% of Canadians, from an Ipsos Public Affairs poll that we conducted, given the choice between two jobs, would choose the one with a strong volunteer culture. So that's really significant, more than 2/3 of Canadians. And further, as another boost to employers, 3 in 5 Canadians would volunteer more if their employer supported them to do so. So hopefully I painted a very clear picture that this is high demand from employees, that their employers are finding ways to support them and engage them. This can be from time off to donating to the charities that they volunteer at, or even donating elsewhere for the sum of volunteer hours that an employee may do in a different place. Also providing supplies and sometimes facilities are some of the key ways. So what does this create? For companies, what they're seeing is that they're having to manage an increase in demand for support and programs from employees. Community organizations report an increase in demand for group volunteering opportunities. And that also leads to lots of opportunity for transformation of our communities through their support, and also for their increase in understanding and empathy through engagement. But how to manage? Company response to demand is usually to formalize strategies and policies. What may have been a nice to do, something that's being taken care of, through off the side of somebody's desk, is now we have personnel in our corporate responsibility or public affairs department who are taking care of this, putting out more formalized policies so employees know what to expect in terms of the support or the time off that they're allowed. Some departments are able to provide an increase of staffing where they see the support, but what we're also seeing a real uptick in is empowering business units, so departments, or employee resource groups like a new millennial group or a parents on the job kind of working group to go out and find their own opportunities that they're interested in the community. And so what this is producing is multiple company representatives looking for opportunities out there. The key driver of those groups tends to be team building for good. We want to get out there, we want to do something together, and we want to make a change for good. But because some of these groups may have less experience in working with community organizations, this may result in requests that have unmanageable timelines or extremely high numbers. It's not uncommon for me to hear stories from community organizations that they'll get a call with about 3 weeks notice with interest in bringing 50 or 100 employees in, and I'm sure a number of people on the call may have experienced this as well. So some charities experience pressure in this way and wondering, are they getting value for the diverting of staff resources? Because of course this really does, even if you have a dedicated volunteer manager, it does require spending time on this. And we really ask charities to take a look at, does this help advance your mission? Either directly because It is helping you move the needle on your mission in a way you couldn't have done before, would have cost you financially. And or is it helping you meet your outreach or education goals? So, just by having more people exposed to your mission, to your beneficiaries, to understanding the social determinants that create the need for your organization, are you getting value for this? And what happens if we say no is a question we hear a lot, especially if that no is to a donor. To this, we certainly encourage upfront conversation with your donors about whether or not an employee volunteering experience is included in your contract. Write that right in. Have a conversation right up front so that that's very clear and you don't feel that demand. But we also encourage donors to not expect it if that hasn't been written in before. Most of the times I find when I'm speaking with community organizations who've made a decision to say, you know what, this doesn't fit our timeline, it's not a need we have at this time, everything works out fine. And an upfront conversation with community or with the company about why this isn't the right time for this can very often result in a better opportunity being formed between the two organizations in the future. Other charities report positive impact because they are clear about what it is that they require from a company. They have increased capacity and reduced costs. Sometimes those reduced costs can be put towards increased staff salaries. There's a staff focus on core service provision, and of course an increased visibility or engagement with these new audiences. I share this picture here. These are employees of SAP who were helping with the setup of a Halloween party for the children who are in rehabilitation at this hospital. This would be the kind of event that you can imagine. It took about 20 employees to pull this together. That would take nurses, therapists, that kind of thing, away from their jobs quite a bit. But because this company can take care of this, and actually has been doing it year over year, that they can focus on that core service provision and provide something to the beneficiaries they wouldn't have had previously. So how can a charity manage? I'd like to introduce you, if you haven't already been introduced, to the Canadian Code for Employer-Supported Volunteering. This resource is available on our website and was created originally with companies in mind, a way to put out some common understanding and a framework on the value, the guiding principles, and the standards for working in partnership with community organizations towards employer-supported volunteering. It was created in 2015. But what we are also finding is it is an excellent tool for community organizations to generate a discussion within the organization about what are the principles and standards that we would like to adhere to, what are our lines, and can we turn these into policy so that when we get a call from a company, we are prepared to respond. We know what our lines are and what our aspirations are, and so that we have confidence throughout the company that when we say yes to an opportunity or when we say no, that we're all on the same page and we know why, and even that we can articulate that to the company we work with. Some more detail on the code. As I mentioned, it articulates the value and impact of employer-supported volunteering, outlines guiding principles, and promotes standards of practice. The standards of practice are largely for the companies, but the value and impact, and particularly the guiding principles, are great for conversations within your charity. The value that's articulated, and again, this was worked out together between community organizations and also our National Corporate Council on Volunteering, which I mentioned previously, is that volunteering is fundamental to a healthy and democratic society. ESV builds relationships, helps workplaces achieve their strategic goals, and underneath each of these points is a lot more detail. But under workplaces, achieving strategic goals includes strengthening image, brand, stakeholder relations. Volunteering is very personal to employees, and therefore there should be some choice facilitated. And it builds the capacity in charitable not-for-profit organizations and contributes to a strong, inclusive, and resilient communities. You may recognize some of the structure of this Canadian Code for Employer-Supported Volunteering as being very similar to the Canadian Volunteering Code, and in fact that inspired this document. The guiding principles that are within, I think you would agree, are necessary for any kind of partnership, whether they're between a community and a corporate organization or otherwise. Again, within the document itself, and it's not a very long document, I think it's about 7-8 pages in all, is more detail on what is meant by shared value and reciprocity, alignment, mutual respect, capacity, shared decision-making, accountability, diversity and inclusion, and the quality of volunteer experience. I give a little bit more detail for you here on reciprocity. What it says under reciprocity is an approach that's mutually beneficial to workplaces and community organizations, and partners have an understanding of and a commitment to meeting each other's goals, needs, and objectives. The framework itself in all of its aspects is not prescriptive. It's open to interpretation and actions. For example, when Volunteer Canada works on a fee-for-service basis with a company on helping them set up their opportunities for working with community organizations, we say that in our interpretation of the framework, we believe that paying for the supplies and materials and the staff time of the community organizations are actions that are necessary to work within the guiding principles of reciprocity and capacity building. So we ask them to put aside money for that in their planning, again, including for the staff time of an organization, because that is a cost to the charity. Some of the standards, as I mentioned, these are mostly of use to companies, but I would recommend sharing this document with the companies that you work with, again, to start a conversation between yourselves. Offer it to them as a resource or support, because these elements and the standards of practice are good components for any company that's trying to build their program so that they do have optimal impact on community and also on their employees. Program strategy, that there's good human resources in place, risk management, all these pieces. And again, they're offered in a lot more detail in the code, an example being leadership here, that the workplace is leadership. So that's the executives, the C-suite level as well. That's the CEOs, the CFOs, promote and support the importance of employer-supported volunteering program in achieving the business's strategic objectives and building healthy, resilient communities that make it a pillar of the company and that it's understood. Again, it's guidance. It's not detailed instructions for workplace volunteer programs. Implementing the standards are according to circumstances, but we recommend that they follow the overall intent of the code. So that's a little bit of detail on our experience and some ways that you can be setting yourselves up for success in working with companies. But I think what's really going to help is hearing from a partnership that has been working on this for some time. So it's my great privilege to introduce you to Judy LaRue of Youth Without Shelter and Paulette Menard with the Home Depot Canada Foundation. These two organizations have a lot of history together, 10 years or more, but also Youth Without Shelter has worked with a lot of companies besides Home Depot, and of course Home Depot, a lot of partnerships with community organizations. So are you with me? Welcome, Judy and Paulette.
Hello.
Hi there. Hi. Thank you for joining us today, and just really love this photo that you offered to us of so many different ways that that Home Depot associates have been able to help Youth Without Shelter with your mission. Judy, how did the partnership begin with Home Depot?
So just over 10 years ago, Youth Without Shelter was undergoing a capital expansion and renovation, and it was actually the local Rexdale store that heard about Youth Without Shelter's expansion and approached us to explore potential project priorities and offer their skills. And they identified that we had a new empty space for storage that had no shelving. So it began with maximizing that space, and the partnership has evolved over time.
Oh, okay, well that's great. So that came from a store, seeing the interest there. Now, that was a long time ago, and you've learned a lot since then. So how does Youth Without Shelter assess corporate volunteering partnerships now?
So about 4 years ago, we took a very hard look at our corporate engagement, and we looked at it through a mission lens, because what we had found was engagement was happening at the expense of supporting primary and operating needs. So we'd become focused on wish lists versus essential projects. And many of the items that you've already mentioned were becoming an issue. So group size was an issue with the increasing demand for large-scale projects of 50 volunteers or more, which was very disruptive to our operations because we're a confidential youth environment, a 53-bed residential house, and confidentiality issues were arising. Optimal group size for us really was 20 volunteers or smaller. So what we did is we refocused from one-off projects to a goal of establishing sustainable engagement partnerships. And working with a board member, we created sort of what we call an internal entry point evaluation tool that we really look at corporate engagement when they first approach us. It is informally done internally here, but it encompasses things like we look at the strategic alignment. Does the company have a corporate social responsibility strategy, and do their values align with ours? What are their goals in aligning with us? Who from the company has reached out to us? Is it happening from perhaps an intern, or is it coming from an executive level? How invested are they as a company in engagement? We do a risk assessment. Does the company have a good reputation? Will the partnership put other partnerships we have at risk? We look at both the benefits to our organization. So will this partnership help us achieve our mission and strategic priorities? How does the company want to engage? Are they looking at engaging employees as volunteers, retirees, family members, skill-based? And financially, are there opportunities for grants or an employee volunteer grant, a matching gift, sponsorship, philanthropy? And we also look at what are the benefits that we can offer to the company. How are we helping them achieve their particular goals and the options that we can bring to the table for volunteering in terms of team building, professional development. And then finally, we look at the execution of the partnership. Will we be working with a committee, as you mentioned, as a champion or an individual? And what sort of recognition would the company be seeking on social media or other engagement measurements that they might be having? And are they open to really doing annual planning and check-ins?
Wow, that's really extensive. You've obviously learned a lot of time working with companies. That's terrific. Paulette, how about Home Depot Canada? How do you decide which community organizations to volunteer with?
Well, for us, we have a formalized employee volunteer program. It's called Team Depot. It's associate-led and is active across the country. So my team manages the program's formal policies and guidelines from our main office in Toronto, but it's really driven by local leadership in our 182 stores across the country. It's born out of the ideas of our founders. So it actually has a really long legacy and history within our company, more than 30 years old. For us, when we're putting together the policies to cascade out to our stores, it's really important that we're impressing upon our partner or our stores that they're working with registered charities. That in our case, because we're a home improvement retailer and much of our employee base has hands-on skills and knowledge with respect to home improvement and repair, we're really looking at a hands-on service component, given the nature of our business. For us, that's the most effective way to harness the skills and knowledge of our people. We assess partnerships based on project parameters as well. And in many cases, we encourage volunteer participation at the local level with charities who align with the focus of our foundation, which is to help prevent and end youth homelessness. But that's not all. We take a look at those opportunities kind of from an 80-20 lens. The vast majority of the things that we're doing are on focus, but we're also really strongly encouraging our stores to find local partnerships and local needs that are most important in their communities. We look at things like the benefit to the partner. How is this particular project helping them serve their goals? Is there more that we can, is this more than a one-off volunteer engagement? Do the employees that are participating Is it fulfilling for them as well? So it's a two-way street. And for us, our associate feedback and how our employees are involved in that interaction is very, very important, because this isn't driven top-down from our executive team or from my team. It's really from the ground up at the store level.
Just a follow-up question for you, Paulette. You mentioned one of the considerations you have is this a one-off? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that a desirable aspect of working with a community organization if it is one-off, or does it depend?
It can be, but what we try to do through our formal policies and procedures with our local leaders on the ground is to encourage that this volunteer engagement is the beginning of a conversation for a relationship. Sometimes our volunteer projects come as a result of funding relationships we have with organizations. And in the case we have with Judy and the team at Youth Without Shelter, a small volunteer project has led to a 10-year relationship that has grown in terms of funding and the ways in which we interact and engage with them. So we don't, it's not a one-way street for us. We look at both sides of it, and certainly encourage our stores to do more than just the one, that one afternoon on that one day, to build a relationship and try to sustain that and grow it over the longer term.
A follow-up question on that for Judy. Judy, at a guess, of the corporate partnerships you've had in the last couple of years, how many would you say look like they're just going to turn out to be one-offs, and how do you feel about that?
I think it all starts with the conversation when the corporations first approach us. I think until the corporation actually comes on site and they have a meaningful experience and they learn more about us and how that relationship can be extended, I think many of the partnerships do start as one-offs until they've realized what synergies can develop from taking it beyond the one-off. But I would say currently, of all the approaches that we currently get, at least 25% would still be one-offs, but they may then reconnect another year, and it evolves.
Do you go into any of those partnerships with a hope or an expectation that they'll become donors? I hear that a lot from community organizations. Like, I don't want to say no to them because it's a connection with a company. Maybe they'll become a donor. What's your advice on that?
Well, I think in any relationship, communication is key, and the charity needs to be very upfront from the beginning of the conversation that there are parameters and that there is a cost involved for the charity to host them, and a capacity to a human resource capacity needs to be in place to provide that meaningful experience, and that there are costs associated with a specific project that might not transpire without that partnership, and that could be an in-kind funding or it could be a financial funding. But I think the transparency about the costs are essential.
Well, that's a great lead into my next question about the guiding principles. So I mentioned the guiding principles, and in fact, just on our screens, I'm going to head back to those so everyone can see them. That you've mentioned a few things that touch on them. With respect to your relationship between Youth Without Shelter and the Home Depot Canada, what practices or policies exist in your relationship that exemplify some of these guiding principles?
Well, first, I'd like to say that I feel that we are a true partnership working within these principles, but that it didn't happen overnight. It's evolved. From a shared value perspective, our mission is aligned with the Home Depot Canada Foundation's commitment to youth homelessness. They really are striving to make change in the sector, and they're very clearly articulated that. So what we have done is, during our recent strategic planning, we approached the Home Depot Canada Foundation as one of our stakeholders to look for their input to assist us, in directions we're going. I feel the mutual respect piece is very evident in our communications. We're transparent, but we're transparent about capacity on both ends. I know it's been shared before that perhaps it's not a team from a store that's coming, but a team from a corporate environment within Home Depot, and maybe they need a bit more education or support on what it is exactly we do. And at the same time, we've learned some health and safety preparations that they take, and we've adopted those. You know, it has been shared decision making. We, you know, stipulate what our projects are priorities, and the Home Depot, you know, they indicate whether it's something they can commit to at the time, and they're very willing to learn. Right now, within our organization, the whole measurement evaluation piece is something that we're re-examining, and I know I've had some great conversations with individuals from the Home Depot Canada Foundation about, you know, the qualitative, quantitative outcomes and how they can be measured. And, you know, they really have worked on the knowledge in the sector. They respect our youth, and they've come to understand the barriers they face. So we've been asked to participate in focus groups. So when they visit and are part of our house, they, I think, have an understanding before they come. But at the same time, there is that very much accountability and commitment of resources, and it has evolved both in-kind, financial, and they recognize the funding is required to move the projects forward, to assist youth, to remove employment barriers, and that we're a house. We need repairs.
How about Paulette, from your point of view, in what ways does your partnership and your practices and policies help support these guiding principles?
Well, I echo so much of what Judy has said with respect to shared value and mutual respect. And, you know, when I think of shared decision making, that's hugely important, quite literally, when it comes to planning and preparing for a renovation or repair type project. And together, I find that we undertake a multi-step process with this partner to determine project scope and make sure there are clear roles and responsibilities. It could be as straightforward as, you know, the discussion is about a project that requires some furniture to be moved, and it's been clearly set out before we get there that day where we're going to be able to move that to, so that we can take care of that specific project for the day. So it really, I think, also speaks to, and then when we understand and focus those conversations on what the partner needs and what we can do to help at the outset, we're better able to build the project plans, determine supplies, and I think that all speaks to accountability. The other big piece, which has been very successful in the way in which we work together, is a really good mutual understanding of the quality of the volunteer experience. Like everyone, I mean, we aim for this to be very meaningful for our associate volunteers, and of course very worthwhile and meaningful in terms of the end result for the partners. It's really important to us that our volunteers can make a connection and understand the cause, and Judy talked about how that's been an education for many of our folks who have come to learn about the work that they do and the young people that they serve. It's really important in those experiences for us that our volunteers can make a connection to the partner. And I think it sounds very basic, but if our folks are understanding and have a stronger connection to the cause, it's just a more meaningful day all around. So we always ask our partners to help our volunteers understand who they're helping, what we're doing, and why the project is important. You know, a kickoff, a few remarks at the beginning of the day, and we try to make that a must-have of most of our project experience. Our goal is to help our volunteers better understand who will benefit from their efforts. It helps us continue to attract and retain them to our specific program efforts internally. It really drives engagement and gets people talking about the great day that they've had at a project site. And, you know, we were recently out, my immediate team was out doing a project with Youth Without Shelter. And that was probably 6 weeks ago, and folks are still talking about that, asking about when the next project is. Again, it sounds really basic, but focusing on some of those aspects of making it a well-rounded, good experience for everybody involved speaks volumes and keeps folks returning, and certainly keeps a positive relationship with the partners that we're working with.
I'm really glad you brought up that point about really bringing it home for the volunteers about why what they're doing today is important, whether they're, you know, painting a wall or cleaning something. It was actually raised yesterday. I was at the Pavro conference, and somebody smartly raised the idea that with community organizations, we can get caught up in the, well, of course it's valuable. It helps our mission, and our mission is this. We need to drill down a little more deeply for those volunteers to help them understand that, making sure that this room is clean or this wall is painted restores dignity to the people that we are helping. It's important that they have restored dignity because, really, really drilling down a bit more deeply, and just as a technique. Sometimes time doesn't allow for that. At the volunteer project itself, I've seen quite effectively this be done off-site with, I've even seen it done remotely. Employees are going to be volunteering. They're at a lunch and learn. And a representative of the community organization, again, even remotely, can take them through a short slide presentation, a short discussion about why does this matter. This, I have found, really positions that volunteer coming in. It gets the sort of all the questions about the newness that might make them nervous out of the way, and allows them to really think about it for a few days. Why this is important? Why does it matter? They come ready in a different kind of way. It's not always possible, but I've found it's an interesting technique where it is possible. So, Paulette, and then perhaps Judy, based on your experience with corporate community partnerships, what advice do you have for community organizations when they just can't meet a volunteering request that a company has put out? How do you want them to respond to you, Paulette?
It's easier said than done, but we want folks to tell us that it's not going to work this time. In my experience, we always approach that as this particular time or that particular project isn't going to work, but let's continue the conversation and figure out some other ways we may be able to help. I also think about the nature of the project, and what I would say is partners really should be asking up front, and companies should be volunteering information about the skill set of their volunteers. We really need to have a good idea of that before we can undertake projects together. We're a home improvement retailer, and the vast majority of our people have skills and know-how when it comes to reno and repair. And to deploy these kind of resources to hands-on projects makes good sense for us. But that skill set isn't represented in all of our employees. I mean, I work in our home office, and I would be the first person to raise my hand to say, go the other way if I'm coming at you with a paintbrush kind of thing. So when we're arranging projects for our office, we're very open at the outset that while it's Home Depot calling, this segment of our employee base may not be most skilled at the more technical projects, but we can help with things like storage and organization or cooking and meal prep. As I said, I think charity partners need to have a good sense of the skill set of the folks coming in. There's no sense in embarking on a project that doesn't fit your need or deploy the resources that are available to you to the best of their ability. We, in my office team, I think does a very good job at the outset of conversations to say, hey, we've got this interested group and at this time, and this is the kind of things. We say out loud, if it doesn't work, you can tell me no. But I know that's not necessarily the way everything's being delivered, and we work really hard here through our formal program policies to cascade that kind of message down, and it's not always going to happen. I would say from my vantage point, it's okay to say no and understand that partners will circle back, but that could also be speaking to a segment of corporate partners that are a little bit more evolved, From our perspective, we want to be helping you with a need rather than having it be a make-work project simply as we've all heard of that same wall that gets painted over and over again.
One of the things I find I end up saying to community organizations is, you were fine before you got that phone call at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday asking for something that you don't need or can't accommodate or both. And you will be fine after you tell them, thank you so much, but not at this time. Or you've offered something else that they haven't picked up on. I want to just pick up for a second on what you said about the skills, though, Paulette, because it is worthwhile remembering, both on the corporate side and on the community side, is that we know from a whole bunch of different research, which reinforce each other, that just as many volunteers want to use their at-work job skill sets as those who don't want to use them anymore. So, you know, even if you feel like you understand the core competencies of a company that you're speaking to, again, be open for discussing other aspects. You know, can you help us with our human resources manual? Can you help us with some marketing and communications? It's just, again, part of a good dialogue. Judy, how about for you, based on your experience? What advice do you have for community organizations that just can't meet the request?
I agree totally with what Paulette is saying. I think you need the dialogue, and that first phone call is so important, and that pre-discussion, but you need to be upfront, because you're not going to be able to deliver on a meaningful experience for either party. So, you know, we try to explain if we can't do a date or a group size, but we're very transparent about what our organization is and the youth that we serve, because our youth are front and center. And I think it's our responsibility to do a bit of education piece along with that no. But I do believe a no still opens the door, and that, you know, it might not work this time, but we'd love to talk to you again at another time, and let's, you know, have a meeting and come and see the shelter.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of community organizations have told me that they really try to have that conversation on site to sort of open people up to the space, its culture, get a sense of the need, and even take them just out of their regular work into that space of, you know, the community and what it's all about. Thank you both so much for sharing your experience. I'm sure there's probably some questions from those who are listening, so perhaps we can turn to any questions that have come in through the chat and see if we can keep up the conversation that way.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. This has been fantastic, and judging by the quality of the questions that we have coming in, super helpful presentation so far. So let's dive right in. Perhaps both Judy and Paulette could comment on how the intake might be different for these programs in terms of volunteers, specifically for things like police checks or criminal record checks.
So from our perspective, in our environment, anything that requires one-on-one interaction with our youth in a private situation requires a vulnerable sector check, but most of the corporate engagement that we're doing is on a broader group basis. So we have other confidentiality requirements and forms in place that do not require vulnerable sectors check because they're with our team throughout the process. So it depends on the particular experience.
And I would echo that. That isn't a point of regular practice when we're evaluating the employee volunteers that are available to go out. We always defer to the expertise and the requirements of the partner we're working with and comply with the requests at that time, case by case.
Great. And how about orientation? How do you handle orientation in these sort of larger group opportunities?
Well, from the charitable perspective, it begins with that first phone call. And we do encourage the company to have an on-site visit and a tour with us prior to the actual project being executed. And we have a pretty structured format now for, as Paulette mentioned, we kick off the morning in a space with the group together, and we give a high-level overview of the organization, the project, but really the impact that project's going to have that day. And then we do through, you know, the logistical things, and execute the project. There's a break for lunch, and we always try to include a tour of our facility, and if feasible, one of our client recipients will share their story with the group, or a team member, you know, on the social work side will indicate their, you know, how it impacts their particular role.
And in our case, I mean, we have a Team Depot captain or a volunteer captain at every single store. And that person is provided with the resources and guidelines, first and foremost around how to prepare and approach volunteer projects, and when they're organizing larger ones. And typically at our store level, we actually just did a survey of our associates, and we're seeing project sizes averaging 6 to 10. Not huge, and I know that there's capacity, not the capacity issues when it's much, much bigger than that. But we provide our captains with the guidelines on how to prepare and what information their participants need to know. For the bigger projects, most of that orientation stuff is done on site. There's very little, unless the charity partner requires some safety evaluations and training to be done ahead of time. There's very little done ahead of time. It's done with kickoff remarks, on site, coming early for registration, going through your waivers and safety considerations, and then building in that time for learning about the partner, learning about the specific tasks of the day.
Wonderful. Now, this is a question I think for Judy. The time involved setting up something like this, and the possible board commitment or senior management commitment to get these projects off the ground. How does your organization deal with that?
So strategically, we made a decision that we were going to direct resources towards corporate engagement because of the type of environment that we work in. So kudos to our board, because it was top-down board. The board enabled the capacity for the employment of an engagement specialist, so a volunteer coordinator, but also I find we're a very team-focused environment, and the team in each of the program areas, they've seen the impact that this engagement can create. So I do count myself as lucky that the team has really bought into this too, but it did come from top-down. It's very board committed.
Wonderful. And I just wanted to share a comment that we had from Elizabeth that I think is an interesting comment based on the orientation conversation that we were having. And Elizabeth says, we find that volunteers are ready to go when they arrive and really don't want to spend a lot of time on an overview. But if they are volunteering most of the day, we find that lunchtime is excellent to give an overview, thank everyone, recognize project leaders, answer questions, show videos, etc. What do you guys think on that?
I mean, I agree that people, when they arrive, they're very anxious to get going. There's sort of, we try to keep it to a very minimum to the overview, but there are certain housekeeping, health and safety guidelines, confidentiality guidelines that need to be reinforced. And lunchtime, yes, seems to be a chance for everybody, that team building piece to happen and to provide more information, yes, as they've relaxed into the environment.
And I would agree with that. I wouldn't. I would say there's certainly some things that we know we need to kick off at the outset. Safety is a really, really important component of how we are empowering our captains to think about the considerations in their project. So there are some things that just need to be done at the beginning, but where your day can flow and you can insert some of the additional information, at lunchtime, we roll with that for sure.
And I'll just add that, further to what I was saying about where I've seen it be done quite effectively to do a lunch and learn before. Again, not every employee team has the ability to do that, but even remotely through a sort of a webinar format, I've seen a charitable organization. They sit at their own desk. They didn't, they don't have time to sort of make their way across town to the company's office, but we're able to, on a webinar format, share a few slides, get people's heads in the day. So it's just another option to consider. And again, that charity said that they found volunteers that they sort of pre-coach, pre-orient, come in just qualitatively different in some ways about their readiness and their openness to the day. They're less concerned about do I feel comfortable? What do I need to expect? And they're more focused on, let's get to it and how can I contribute. They have even seen situations where those people come going, oh, great, I'm going to a shelter. Is there anything else I could bring? Is there anything else you need? They're sort of communicating in between. So just a suggestion.
Wonderful. And this is probably a question for Paulette and maybe for Elizabeth to jump in too, but we've talked a lot today about the corporations approaching the charities, but how about tips for a charity that wants to approach a company to pitch an opportunity? Do you have some tips on that, and is there a best time of year to consider doing that?
Best time of year, I mean, not for us. I think the most important thing in the approach is to understand a little bit about the company that you are interested in working with, to give the request time, so a good few months as you're thinking about it ahead of time. In our case, I would always encourage folks to contact our offices here or to approach local leaders at the store, because that's information that gets pushed up to us to help. But being really organized in terms of your ask and being specific at the outset, like to say, I have this idea and this is what we're thinking about, and from there we start the conversation. If it's too general, it's really hard for us to think about how to manage it. So I would go with some specificity, but really understand the organization and where you can find, as we were talking about the guiding principles, where you can find that shared value piece, if there's alignment between the clients you're serving and the work that you're doing with our overall core focus. That makes the conversation move a lot faster and go a lot easier.
Great. And we've talked a fair bit about the sort of more group volunteering opportunities today, and I know that we've referenced some of the other types of corporate volunteering that can take place, where there may be skilled volunteers coming in and doing some other things for the charity. Are there any tips on how to build that part of the program, and how to keep the corporate volunteers engaged through that?
I would say from my end, I guess, we don't do, our main focus is on the hands-on service component because of its connection to core business. Some of the higher skill stuff evolves naturally for the employee to then be more of an individual contributor, and that comes from being on site and enjoying their experience. But we as an organization have really focused on the hands-on skill service project component of our program, and in terms of what we're encouraging our employees to do.
It's Elizabeth from Volunteer Canada. I think where we've seen this be most successful is when the project is, and it's in some way speaking to Paulette's answer to the last question, is when as specific as you can be. If there's a need that you think is filled more on an ongoing basis, for example, perhaps you need some help with the IT or the finance or a strategic plan or a financial model, being very clear about what the need is, in as much as sometimes even the scope of it is what your organization needs to understand, and maybe that's the place you start, but creating something that has a little bit of detail about, we need this is why we need it, and almost in a job description fashion, so that you can sort of shop it around to your current corporate partners or new corporate partners with your idea, and then have a dialogue about that as well. It may even be difficult for you sometimes to know how long it will take, so that's something to work out in the discussion as well. So that you get sort of the right size problem defined for the amount of time or resources that the company has is a way to approach it. But also be clear about what you don't know. Quite frankly, very recently, Volunteer Canada put out a request to a corporate partner for some support that would be of a skilled nature, and we said what we know and what we don't know, and that allowed our corporate partner to be able to respond with how they think they might like to approach this.
That's a great point. Yeah. Now shifting gears a little bit here. We've had quite a few of our participants have mentioned that when they are approached by corporations, the sort of main piece that the corporations want is team building. So they're really mentioning the team building a lot. And our participants are wondering if you have some tips on how to help the corporations understand, you know, that the team building can be an outcome of the volunteering, but that there's, you know, other things that the charities need as well, and sort of how to balance those different needs between the charity and the company, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it starts again with that initial conversation, but we also put together a project outline, and we try to share with the company, you know, what the different elements of the project are and how their team will be working together. But we do use, you know, depending on how their volunteers are distributed throughout our building, it's that time where they come together as a group at lunchtime, or the time where they're informally gathered in our backyard or something, where the team building sort of naturally evolves. So I think the biggest tip I can give is it's the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to do a bit of education and sharing of ideas in advance, because it may not be the way they had thought about it could evolve, but, you know, based on your experience, you know, these are the types of things that can happen.
I think I might be reading between the lines a little bit on the questions you might be getting from the chat is, you know, what if it feels like, you know, this is really driven by what do we need? This is, you know, instead of paying for some other kind of a rock climbing or other kind of a team building activity. And I think, you know, what Judy was talking about that conversation and kind of sussing out, like, this is what we're about, this is what we need. In some ways, you can feel, right? You can feel if there is, yes, of course, they're leading with language about team building, but they do understand that they want to make a community impact, again, sort of team building for good, or you'll be able to hear if that really isn't in the priority set at all, and they're not coming along in the dialogue. So, and then, of course, that does sort of put a question in your mind about how well will the day turn out if we're not all focused towards what's the change we can make in our community. So just be listening to that. Don't if you hear that language come out first, don't assume that that's all that's behind it. Have a dialogue and see where they're at, and if you have a comfort level where you are working on that shared value principle.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're definitely reading correctly between the lines there. No, that's great. Excellent advice. Now let's, we're going to be coming up on time here shortly, so I just want to finish up with maybe having the three of you discuss a little bit about recognizing corporate volunteers, how you go about doing this, you know, how to recognize the corporation, but maybe also the individual volunteers as well, and how that all works.
So we have, I mean, internally through our program, there are certain ways we recognize our captains. We have formal programs, we have awards programs in that way. We always, I mean, as we can't, from my vantage point, I can't understand or have a good grasp of the degree to which our associates are involved in community. We have, you know, 27,000 people that work for the Home Depot. So I always really appreciate knowing and hearing from partners who've had an engagement with a captain or a store leader or volunteer that's, you know, been over and above and somewhat exceptional, and we can then bring additional profile to their contributions internally that way. And that is as simple as an email to call out what the contributions of that person, or a letter. I mean, I have a terrific letter here that Judy sent through around about our leader at our Rexdale store, Joe, and what his contributions have meant. But I always like hearing about it, but as far as recognition for our efforts as a company, that's not a motivator for the Home Depot. But as a leader of a volunteer program in the company, I really like hearing about what a particular individual's engagement with your organization has been, and if it's made it, you know, better or been positive.
And I think that gets back to what Paulette was saying earlier, is the charity needs to learn about the companies that they're engaging with, and what is that recognition that they're really looking for. You know, is it seeing all the photos from the project that day? Is it the personal thank yous? Or recently when the Home Depot was on site, there was a large capital project done here in our kitchen, and a piece of the kitchen, the fridge door, was painted by a staff member who volunteered their time and created a thank you that our youth and our team signed, and it was presented to them. So it was like full circle. This is what you made possible.
I'll just share last perhaps little tip here is that research that Volunteer Canada did a couple of years ago shows that 80% of volunteers want an informal thank you. So some recognition from a manager or a little note. Doesn't need to be expensive, but the second most popular way is knowing about the impact of the work. And we hear both companies and charities challenged to try to close the loop on coming back to the employees, the volunteers, maybe 6 months or a year out, or some time lets lapse that lets them know, you know, because you did this, this changed in our community, in the work that we do with our beneficiaries. And I think that requires some built-in processes and some thoughtfulness to be able to give some indication. You know, we can't always give attribution to company did this and these lives changed, but we can give a contribution. You contributed in this way, and it allowed us to make these kinds of changes. And again, that's for both companies and community organizations to work on, making that circle back to the volunteer, regardless of whether the volunteer is with a company or otherwise.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're going to call it there because I'm conscious that we are a little bit over time. But I want to thank you again, Elizabeth, Paulette, Judy. This has been super helpful. Very interesting to hear also the sort of hands-on nitty-gritty of how these successful partnerships work. So a big thanks also to Paulette and Judy for joining us today and sharing your experiences. And we want to, of course, give a big shout out to Elizabeth from Volunteer Canada for helping us to organize this session today. So thanks to you as well. Now, before we sign off...
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you. Before we sign off, I do want to remind all the participants that we're going to follow up with you by email tomorrow with the webinar recording. We'll also have a link to a short survey there, so please just take a moment to fill it out. It just literally takes 1 or 2 minutes. It helps us to refine our content and delivery for the future, and you'll have an opportunity there to let us know if there's other topics you'd like to see us cover in a future session. So with that, I want to thank you all again for joining us today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much.